Hello viewers, it's Josie. Welcome back to my channel where I read poetry and movie reviews. And as you can see, I'm in a different space. This is not my new apartment just yet. I'm still in the Airbnb and I will be moving into my new place July 1st. But that being said, I'm going to talk about the movies I've been watching for the first half of 2022, given that the first half we're almost done with June, and yeah, we're halfway through 2022. So I'm going to talk about what I've been watching from January through this month of June. Okay, first off, we're gonna start with Chances Are from 1989, directed by Emile Ardolino, who directed Sister Act and Dirty Dancing, if I'm correct. So in this movie, a man named Louis Jeffries, played by Chris McDonald, and his wife Corinne, played by Sybil Shepherd, are a married couple about to have a baby. His best friend Phil, played by Ryan O'Neal, is in love with Corinne. And then Louis tragically dies in a car accident. And then Louis is reincarnated as a man named Alex Finch, played by a young Robert Downey Jr. And he goes to college with a girl named Miranda, played by Mary Stuart Masterson from Some Kind of Wonderful and Benny and June, who just so happens to be the daughter he had with Corinne as Louis in his past life. And they fall in love and start seeing each other. Miranda takes Alex to her mother, Corinne, who I think is a museum curator working on like a First Lady display. And she's been grieving Louis for several years. She's in therapy. And as Miranda grew up, Phil acted as a stepfather to her. And then Alex starts recalling his past life memories with Corinne, and then this leads him to waver whether he should continue his relationship with Miranda or be with his quote-unquote widow. And, okay, we don't get that many, we only get like one scene in the afterlife, but I will say that the afterlife elements in this film are pretty creative. I won't spoil how they go about it. Let's just say there's an interesting way of how these characters remember or not remember their previous lives. It's a really cute, sweet movie. Everyone in the cast is wonderful. Watching Robert Downey Jr. in his early films, you could tell that he was always good at balancing comedic ability with dramatic pathos. What's interesting about this is that both Sybil Shepherd and Ryan O'Neal worked with director Peter Bogdanovich, who passed recently. Sybil Shepherd was, of course, in The Last Picture Show, and Ryan O'Neal was in Paper Moon. And the story also has some interesting things to say about grief and moving on. Last time I checked, Chances Are is streaming for free on Pluto TV, and it's also on DVD. It doesn't have a Blu-ray release yet, I don't think, but I'm sure maybe hopefully down the line it gets one, because I think it's a great, it's an underseen late 80s gem. Moving on to Claudine from 1974, directed by John Barry. In this romantic comedy, Claudine, played by Diane Carroll, is a single mother in Harlem trying to provide for her 6 children while being on welfare. She works as a maid for rich families in the suburbs. One day she meets a kind-hearted garbage man named Roop, also known as Roop, played by a young James Earl Jones. Well, younger James Earl Jones. They start seeing each other, and he has to adjust to the challenge of stepfatherhood. I'm so glad I discovered this sweet romantic gem. It's also a complex character study of a mother trying to manage her life under tough financial conditions. If you want to look at Claudine as a snapshot of 1970s history, you see the struggles families on welfare faced back then, particularly in the black community. Certainly, this can connect to today with racial wealth gap disparities. What I really love about this film is that although the characters are black, it does not constantly remind you of their race. Yes, racial marginalization plays a part in the narrative. In other words, it's not designed to preach social justice. Instead, it's focused on being a love story and a family drama first. While everyone must learn about racial equality and justice, I think it is important to have black-led films that aren't necessarily about the color of their skin. It makes black characters feel more equal to those who are white because there's no need to remind us that they're different or separate. Diahann Carroll and James Earl Jones both give fantastic performances. Diahann Carroll was actually nominated for an Oscar for this movie. James Earl Jones should have been nominated too, but that's another story. I was also surprisingly impressed by the actors who played the kids, particularly the teenage son and daughter. Claudine is available on Blu-ray through Criterion, and I also believe you can watch it for free on YouTube. Next up is Donkey Skin, directed by Jacques Demy, who directed The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. He was married to the late, great Agnes Varda, who died, I think like 4 or 5 years ago already. This is a French surreal musical fantasy comedy based on the Charles Perrault fairy tale of the same title. In a magical land, a king, legendary French actor Jean Marais, if I'm pronouncing his name right, who you may recognize from... Come on, internet. From La Belle La Bête. This king, played by Jean Marais, wants to marry his own daughter, played by Catherine Deneuve, because she's the closest thing to his late wife. I know, that's icky, but that's the conflict of the film. The princess's fairy godmother, played by Delphine Seyrig, if I'm pronouncing her name right, gets her out of this incestuous marriage by disguising her as a donkey. She forms a new identity, Donkey Skin. The princess / Donkey Skin meets a handsome prince, and the two fall in love. It's odd. Roger Ebert wrote in his review, Donkey Skin is told with the simplicity and beauty of a child's fairy tale, but with emotional undertones and a surrealistic style that adults are more likely to appreciate. The surreal scenery and costumes are extremely colorful. What's funny about the king's palace is that the king's men on horses have blue skin and ride on blue horses. They look like the guys in the Blue Man Group. And then I think on the prince's side, it's all red, if I'm remembering correctly. And the fairy godmother's dress looks like a butterfly. That sort of correlates with her breaking free from her father. As far as the musical sequences, if you're expecting big dance numbers, there really aren't any. Rather, the musical sequences are much more of a showcase for the vocal talents, the production design, and interesting editing choices. And that's not a knock on the film. In fact, I quite like it. Had there been big dance numbers, it would have been distracting. Catherine Deneuve has such a beautiful voice. Of course, she was in Umbrellas of Cherbourg. If I do have any criticism, I would say that I find some of the romance with the prince a little bit unrealistic. But I can override and forgive that because, after all, it is a quote unquote fairy tale. There's one, and back to like the technical aspects of the film. There's one superbly edited sequence where Donkey Skin makes a cake for the prince, and there are jump cuts between her making the cake in the donkey costume and a fanciful dress. And to Roger Ebert's point about Donkey Skin being for adults, although there's no explicit sexuality in the film, there's a bit of phallic symbolism. For instance, there's a part where Pink Rose talks to the prince with a woman's mouth. It's clearly a sexual innuendo. Well, if you want to interpret it that way. During the prince's search for the princess, he asks the local maidens to try a ring on their fingers. Overall, this is a very fascinating and entertaining allegory of breaking free from child abuse. Well, that's one way of looking at it. That's what I saw. I want to thank TJ from Cinematheque for turning me onto this film. And so Donkey Skin is available on Criterion Blu-ray. Okay, so that's Donkey Skin. Moving forward to The Far Country, a 1954 Western from Anthony Mann, set during the Yukon Gold Rush. A cowboy named Jeff Webster, played by Jimmy Stewart, along with his partner Ben Tatum, played by Walter Brennan, bring their cattle from Wyoming to Seattle. On their way, they face the corrupt Judge Gannon. Jeff, Jimmy Stewart, and his team have to fight Gannon and his henchmen off. Jeff and Tatum get involved in the business of gold. Jeff is caught in a love triangle between two women, a voluptuously manipulative saloon keeper named Rhonda Castle, played by Ruth Roman, and a woman named Renee, Corinne Calvet, played by Corinne Calvet. It's a great buddy adventure western and love triangle narrative. The film goes deep into the capitalistic politics of the gold rush of that time period. Jimmy Stewart's character is complex. Though you want to see him succeed, he has flaws. He's a man wanted for murder, and he's not immune to greed. He wants to make money off of marketing cattle. Even so, while it's not an easy change of heart, he transitions from rugged individualism to a stronger sense of community. The scenery of the Pacific Northwestern landscape is gorgeous. The filming location was Jasper National Park in Alberta, Canada. The Technicolor looks beautiful on the Blu-ray. Anthony Mann's westerns are true love letters to the frontier as well as great stories. The Far Country is available on Blu-ray through Arrow Academy. Next up is Ganja and Hess from 1973, directed by Bill Gunn. Going into this, I was expecting a blaxploitation vampire flick. Well, I'll go into that more later. Two black anthropologists named Dr. Hess Green. A black anthropologist named Dr. Hess Green, played by Dwayne Jones, is a professor of archaeology and geology, as well as a part-time minister. He and his new research assistant, Dr. Mehta, played by director Bill Gunn himself, collaborate on a project about a tribe of African blood drinkers called the Myrthians. And Mehta gets possessed by the spirit of the tribe's queen. He stabs Hess with a Myrthian dagger and then shoots himself. The dagger, however, gives Hess the gift of immortality and he becomes a blood-addicted vampire. Metta's widow comes into the picture searching for her lost husband, only to have an affair with Hess. As I was trying to say earlier, going into this, I was expecting it to be a campy horror. That's what the studio thought when they greenlit it, but the story plays more like an esoteric mythological tragedy. The cinematography and editing are super psychedelic. What's clever about the editing is the use of juxtapositional images, particularly frames of Hess's estate home and the African tribal art. The score is bone-chilling. It sort of reminded me of the original Suspiria score. Bill Gunn mostly intended this film to be an allegory for addiction. Ganja and Hess premiered at Cannes to glowing reviews. Unfortunately, the financiers were unhappy with the film because it wasn't a genre film akin to Shaft and Superfly like they were expecting. So they butchered it into a typical erotic thriller akin to to one similar that came around that time. This Ganja and Hess would actually make a good double feature with Park Chan-wook's Thirst, which is another erotic vampire thriller movie, which I watched for the first time recently, which was quite wild but very interesting. Ganja and Hess is available to watch on Hulu and Amazon. If you are subscribed to Showtime, it's also on DVD and Blu-ray through Kino. Next up, speaking of Park Chan-wook, I'm a Cyborg, But That's Okay from 2006, directed by Park Chan-wook. And I checked out those two films because he had a new movie at Cannes, which he actually won Best Director for, Decision to Leave. That's coming to movie this fall. It's going to be in like limited theaters and then movie in the fall, I'm pretty sure. In this romantic comedy, I'm talking about I'm a Cyborg, But That's Okay. A girl named Cha Young has a delusion that she is a cyborg and enters a mental institution. She starves herself and speaks to inanimate objects. She also has a bad habit of physically harming herself. Mental illness seems to run in Cha Young's family, for her grandmother, whom she was very close with, had a delusion she was a mouse. Arguably, her problem stemmed from losing her grandmother since she was so close with. Cha Young even keeps her grandmother's dentures. At the mental hospital, Cha Young meets a schizophrenic kleptomaniac patient named Il-sun. He has a delusion that he can steal other people's souls, and the two fall in love. It's a charming love story with very funny, surrealist elements. Someone on Letterboxd described it as a South Korean version of Amelie set in a psychiatric ward. The fantasies these characters have in their psychotic minds are quite hilarious. This is the most colorful, eye-popping production design I have ever seen of a movie set in a mental hospital. The best aspect about it is how the mental patients are not written as objects of pity, but rather human beings deserving of love and connection. I'm a Cyborg, But That's Okay is currently unavailable on any of the streamers. Bummer. But it's available on DVD. I rented it on DVD through an interlibrary loan, as I usually do with most of the stuff I watch. I'm not sure if there's a Blu-ray, but it would be great if this was added to Criterion or Kino. Come on, Criterion or Kino or whatever boutique label. If you're listening, consider I'm a Cyborg, But That's Okay. Moving forward to Love Jones from 1997, directed by Theodore Witcher. I'm really glad to have discovered this movie thanks to Criterion. This is a cult classic amongst the Black community, but I actually think it's pretty universal. Set in Chicago, Darius Lovehall, played by Larenz Tate from Menace to Society, is a poet, and Nina Mosley, played by Nia Long, is a photographer with hidden poetic talents. The two meet and fall in love. However, there's some hesitation towards commitment. They're unsure if they are meant to be or if they're just kicking it, as they refer to the idea of a fling in a movie. It has a moody yet dreamlike color palette with dark blues, reds, and browns. There's some funky jazz and reggae tunes. Daryl Jones scored the film. The music blends really well with dreamy velvet tone cinematography. The chemistry between Larenz Tate and Nia Long is sensuously electrifying. I love how Nia Long's character, though in a relationship with Larenz Tate, has her own individuality with her creative pursuits in photography and poetry. Similar to Claudine, what's so remarkable about Love Jones is the way it's a black love story that exists the same way that a love story with white characters would exist. It's a shame that Theodore Witcher didn't direct another movie after this. Wouldn't it be wonderful if he just somehow made a comeback? If so, it would be like 25, 30 years since his first feature. Love Jones, as I mentioned, is on Blu-ray through Criterion. Gorgeous color transfer, by the way. And you can watch it on Tubi. Next up, another film from 1997, Running Time, directed by Josh Becker. A former convict named Carl, played by Bruce Campbell from the Evil Dead movies, and Burn Notice, which some of your parents may recognize him from, leaves prison after 5 years, only to gather with a group of accomplices to pull off a heist. In the middle of doing so, he runs into a girl he knew from high school who's now involved in prostitution. And they sort of had a fling, and then there's some rekindling there. Bruce Campbell is known for being goofy, but we really see a serious side to him here. He gives a surprisingly nuanced performance. And Running Time was shot in one take. It's a one-take movie. Before Birdman in 1917. Obviously, of course, after Rope. Shot in black and white. It's very short, clocking in at only 70 minutes. The director, Josh Becker, actually went to high school with Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi, and Ted Raimi. Yeah, if you guys didn't know this, Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi, of course, they were in a lot of movies together. He's in practically all his movies. He went to high school with Sam Raimi. And Josh Becker, the director of this movie. Running Time is available on Blu-ray through Synapse. Although story-wise, they aren't that much alike, but Running Time would make a good double feature with Christopher Nolan's Following because they're both black and white crime films that clock in at only 70 minutes. And next up is Small Change from 1976, directed by the great Francois Truffaut. This is an adorable little French film told in a series of vignettes about young children in school. Each episode is charming in its own way. You have one kid, Patrick, who's a class clown. Of course, the subject of crushes and first love comes up. There's a nail-biting segment where a cat and a toddler climb out of a window. As delightful as this movie is, it does not shy away from dark themes. It does touch upon economic disparity. One of the students, Julian, lives in an abusive household and has trouble sleeping at night. Julian is reluctant to change his clothes for gym class because he doesn't want the other kids to see his bruises. But the biggest takeaway from this movie is no matter what background we're from, a sense of childhood innocence can help us bond together. From a structural standpoint, if you like the vignette style of storytelling seen recently in Licorice Pizza and Apollo 10 1/2, I think you'd really like this movie. And you can also, it's similar to Boyhood in that regard too. Small Change is available to watch on Amazon Prime and Paramount Plus. It's also on DVD. I think it's on Amazon Prime. I could be wrong about that. I have to double check. It's on DVD. That's how I watched it. I'm unsure about it being on Blu-ray. It would just be great if Criterion or Arrow put it out, because it is Truffaut, after all. He directed the 400 Blows. And then finally, it's probably I'm saving my favorite for last. Sundown, The Vampire in Retreat from 1989 or 1990. Let me check the date. Sundown. Yes, it says it was released in 1989. Okay, so Sundown is a vampire western horror comedy. A group of vampires live reclusively in a middle American town called Purgatory. Note that's a fictional place for town for this movie. In order to coexist peacefully with humans, their leader, Count Marjulac, played by the late great David Carradine from Kill Bill, has them drink artificial blood instead of human blood so that they can get their nutrition, if you will. The vampires wear sunscreen for protection, and that one side of the vampires are in favor of this while the other side rebels, and a civil war takes place. One day, a family comes to the town on vacation because the engineer dad, David, played by Jim Metzler, has to do work on the vampires' artificial blood lab since he's the one who designed it in the first place. He brings his wife, Sarah, played by Morgan Brittany, and their daughters, Gwen and Juliet. And one of Van Helsing's descendant relatives, Robert Van Helsing, Bruce Campbell again, he plays Robert Van Helsing, comes into the picture with the goal of destroying the vampires, but he ends up falling in love with a vampire girl named Sandy, played by Deborah Foreman, who you may recognize from the 80s movie Valley Girl with Nick Cage. This film blends and balances all these subplots really well. More importantly, the mixing of genres is done in quite a creative way. As ridiculous and campy as some might consider this film to be, the vampire action sequences are actually superbly directed. It has an outstanding theme composed by Richard Stone, who didn't have a very long career. He scored a couple B-movies in the 80s, and in the 90s, when Warner Brothers Animation Studios animation had sort of a revival with Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, Tiny Toons, etc., he did some of the music for those, but sadly he died too soon in 2001. Undoubtedly, the best thing about this movie is the ensemble cast. In addition to the actors I've mentioned, you also got Emmett Walsh, Maxwell Caulfield, Oscar nominee John Ireland from All the King's Men, and even Dana Ashbrook, who was Bobby Briggs on Twin Peaks. I loved this movie. Big recommendation from me. Sundown, The Vampire in Retreat is available to watch for free on Plex and Vudu, I think. And you can rent it for a couple dollars on Amazon, and it's on DVD and Blu-ray. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this video. It's been such a pleasure sharing this with you. And the links to my socials are in the description below. And if you like this video and want to check out more positive poems or movie-related videos, then click the like button and subscribe. I'm looking forward to moving into my new place. It was a pleasure doing this video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.